Welcome to the Into Novus Knowledge Agronomy Podcast, your go-to resource for agronomic insights, technology solutions, and ongoing education. At Into, we combine agronomic expertise from soil analysis to best practice application methodologies to provide a holistic view for your yield optimization. Our focus is on practical strategies that improve efficiency and drive better results in the field. Join us for interesting discussions, expert advice, and the latest advancements shaping modern agriculture. Whether you're in the field, on the road, or at your facility, we're here to keep you informed ahead of the curve. Welcome to the Into podcast. We appreciate everybody listening today. Today I'm joined with Rodney Phelps up in Illinois and Derek Cottrill in Northwest Missouri. How are you guys?
Doing good.
Guys, a little bit of activity going on. I don't know if you guys want to start with a brief update. Maybe we'll start with Rodney over that way, and then we'll work our way back to Derek and down to me.
Yeah, so we're typical March weather. We flipped the calendar today to April 1st, April Fools. Hopefully that doesn't jinx us. We've had some rain overnight. We actually can use the rain. I just looked at some temperature things. We had a low of 7 back the middle on the 17th of the month, and then we had a high of 86 4 days later. So we've had some big temperature swings, but nothing to get us real concerned. We have had a few beans poked in. The ground conditions have been absolutely incredible leading into this, but nothing to get all earth-shattering and, oh my gosh, we got to go. So typical March. Now we'll see when we turn the calendar here to April, how things progress.
Appreciate it, Rodney. What about you, Derek?
Yeah, we're moving right along here with field progress. We're probably tracking a little bit ahead of last year for sure. We'll have more late March planted crop than we did last year, certainly. A lot of that has to do with our weather we've had the last 10 days. We broke several high temperature records on 6 or 7 days, and soil conditions have been good, so there's been more planters running here over the last 5 to 7 days. All the gas is pretty much wrapped up, which is good, but still some dry spreading going on. A lot of focus shifting to getting weeds under control, and the no-till acres, those fields are greening up or purpling up where guys have hen bit and things like that now. So that's been a focus. But, we've been above average temperatures, but this morning it's 50 degrees and rain coming. So soil temperatures on bare ground have been around getting close to that 60 degrees on bare ground, but underneath, heavy residue or even heavy winter annual pressure, those are probably going to be cooler. And especially after this rain, they're going to be a little bit cool. But I say once we dry out again here after this rain that's came through most of my territory tonight and over the next couple of days, once it dries out, we were needing moisture pretty bad. So the rain was definitely welcome, but once it dries out, I think everybody's going to be ready to go by then.
Appreciate it, Derek. Yeah, I'd just echo that for the central Missouri area. Like, we're got more done this year at this point in time than probably in the last several years. So lots is happening. Everybody's going to be ready to roll once it dries back out. And yeah, to your point, more late planted March crop than what we've had in a long time, but still a lot of folks held off, waited, just kind of waiting to see what the temperatures, what this rain's going to do. So a few guys going, but not a lot. But yeah, the flag will drop next time once it dries back out. So I guess that's a good segue into, to me, I think the question this week, at least in my geography, was to plant or not to plant. That was the question of the week. And guys trying to figure out, do I take advantage of these warm temperatures, or am I going to hold off and wait for this large rain that they were predicting? We'll see what comes out of this. But at one point they were talking 3 to 5 inches. I think they've backed that up now. It's hard for me to believe it's only the 1st of April with kind of like what Derek said, some of those 80 plus, almost 90 degree temperatures that we had. It sure didn't seem like a regular March. And that kind of rolls into one of the big topics I think that we're going to hit on today, and that's just talking about the warm March temperatures. What do they mean? Me, I wonder how warm were they? How unseasonably warm? And so I ran some of that weather data just looking at Columbia, and March of 2026 is going to go down as the fourth warmest in the last 30 years. So it's only going to be behind 2012, 2007, and just barely behind 2016. So it's one of the warmest Marches when you look at average temperatures. You look at maximum temperatures, and it was the second warmest or the second highest highs in 30 years, just behind 2012. So very unseasonably warm. And Derek, Rodney, when I think about that, what does that mean from a planning perspective, those warm temperatures? There's several topics that we can hit on today that we're going to hit on talking about the warm March, but one of them is just planning. So if you guys decided to crank into it, and I'll let you guys jump on and make your comments as well. But we talked about last time corn taking 120 GDUs to get out of the ground, soybeans anywhere from 90 to 130. And so if you start running those temperatures from Columbia, the earliest planted corn I know of, they got planted the 20th of March. You start running those numbers, and we've had 155 GDUs. That was as of last night from that planting date, which means that corn should be out of the ground. If you planted beans that same day, they should be poking through as well. So that's rather quick to get there. We got there in less than 2 weeks for sure. When you look at somebody that planted maybe over the weekend, the 28th, which would have been the first chance after we had a little rain there Thursday night, Friday morning, first chance somebody might have been able to get back into it. You start running those numbers, and it looks like they'll get to 120 GDUs in 12 days, which is pretty dang good this time of year. Usually I'm shooting for 14 days this time of year to get that 120, get corn out of the ground. They're going to get there in 12. But if you take it and you planted yesterday, 331, maybe you're projecting only get 95 GDUs by the 15th of April. And to me, that's beyond that 14-day kind of threshold, I guess, where my thoughts are at. And that would be more typical, I would think, this time of year to slowly accumulate those. So I guess I'm just hitting on the point that, yeah, if you were able to, you had ground ready to go and you jumped out there early, depending on what spring freeze looks like, and we'll talk about that later, you might look pretty smart. I don't know what you want to jump in on there, Derek, because I know you had some guys going as well. Just any points you want to make?
Yeah, I think I'm more similar to you than say maybe Rodney, by the way it sounds. But and that's been, I guess, my hot topic of calls I've been getting from growers I work with over the last week is, to plant or not to plant. Regardless of the soil conditions and things like that, I think guys are just remembering. And it is still, well, up until today, it was still March, and I'll double check in there. But I'm just like you with the GDU accumulations and our temperatures and things like that. And our soils, for the most part, have definitely been fit for planting. And so I think it was a good decision, at least for some of those guys to go ahead and be getting some crop be put in the ground here over the last week. Now, a couple of things we've focused a lot about temperature, but I would remind guys the importance of moisture when it comes to planting and planting into consistent moisture will be just important. And that's, I think, in my territory where I've been more cautious or had more concern than the soil temperatures and things like that is when it comes to moisture. So looking at like the university weather station there out of Albany, in the northern part of my geography, there's only been 1.1 inches of rain there since February 1st. So we're really, really dry. And if some of us will remember last planting season, last April, we went a good 3-week period through there where at least the western side of my geography didn't get any rain, and we had a lot of seed going into really dry soils, and we weren't chasing moisture. And what can happen there is that when we finally get moisture, something like we're getting today through the end of the week, is those fields are going to saturate differently at different levels, and therefore you got seed soaking up moisture to germinate at different timings, and it eventually results in uneven emergence. And so I would this doesn't really have to do with this time of year, because I'd tell you the same thing at the end of April, but we need to make sure when we think of that optimal depth, up into a point, we want to be making sure we're getting to a depth that we're planting into consistent moisture. And that's been my only reminder for guys been calling me over the last week. Yes, the fields are working up nice. Soil conditions are good, but on the dry side, And when we talk about what depth we need to be going at early, it needs to be down there to where it's all getting in consistent moisture. That also will reduce your risk of, say, like a chilling injury from a cold rain that we might be getting right now. Like I said, my truck said 50 degrees this morning, and I'm on the southern end of my Northwest Missouri territory. So up north, up in that Albany Stanberry area, even Tri County Maitland area, they're probably even a little bit cooler up there. And so we wouldn't want that to be in dry. We wouldn't want to have seed in dry soil from that standpoint. But besides that, I was looking as far as growing degree units and things like that. Since March 20th, 21st, that's when, the handful of growers that I work with quite a bit were really starting to get into planning mode and thinking about putting stuff in. And since the 20th up until today, we're 115 GDUs above normal. So if you would have got seed there in the ground, last 2 weeks, you're probably sitting pretty good. And that was probably a wise decision, at least to get some crop in at that time. But
Rodney, anything you
Yeah,
got to add?
I'll jump in, and we're not in a, as you guys are in looking at planting, but we are accumulating heat units because we have had 80-degree days. So that leads my mind to winter annuals and even some of our summers. We're accumulating heat units, so we should be able to kill a lot of stuff with burn downs. Also, you got to remember bugs and everything else are heat unit sensitive too. So I think excuse me, we're going to have a more advanced, probably spring coming into April 1st than we have in several years because we have been warmer and in most cases drier. So things are coming on pretty fast.
Rodney, I think you bring up the big point there, and I don't want to deviate from our topic here, but it goes hand in hand since you mentioned it. I think that's one of the big ones, not even this year, but as our planting dates have moved up, especially soybean planting dates. I think I said it on one of the podcasts that we did here over the last couple of weeks, but I think across the Midwest, our soybean planting dates have moved up somewhere 2.5 to almost 3 weeks. But one thing in some cases that we don't remember is if we move up our planting date, that shifts our whole management plan up. So we might have been used to planting in late April, early May beans, and our post apps going on in June. Now we're planting late March, early April. That means we should expect our post applications to be going on earlier. And if our GDUs are accumulating, like you just said, Rodney, weed emergence, something like water hemp, a summer annual. Yeah, we typically mid to late April start seeing it a little bit. Well, if there's more GDUs accumulating, we're going to have early emergence of things like water hemp and some of those weeds that might come a little bit later. So keep that in mind. If we're getting all these warm temperatures, it doesn't just impact the crop. Like Rodney said, insects, weed emergence, and all that, and your whole program is going to shift up. And if we don't adjust to our planning date, we end up getting behind in that post window sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's a couple topics I guess I want to dive a little bit more into. That's a good segue. But when you start talking about weed control, that's a good one. Water hemp is obviously the driver weed for all of us. And so we start thinking about the unseasonably warm temperatures, and I saw my first water hemp that had emerged in a field that had a fall applied herbicide on it this week. Been seeing a fair amount of giant ragweed that's been coming in various fields, and that's usually the first summer annual out, at least in my geography. Now, the fact that we're starting to get a water hemp, to Derek's point, I mean that means despite what the calendar says, now it's time to start implementing control for those weeds. And if you want to be ahead of the game and lay your residual down in front of those, you need to be on the ball here pretty quick. And I guess I would also add that sometimes I see folks get lulled to sleep on these fall applied herbicides. They do a tremendous job. You can drive up and down the road right now and tell the ones that had a fall applied and those that didn't, tremendous job of controlling winter annual weeds. That's what they're focused on. They do a really good job of that. They are not meant for summer annual weed control. And honestly, some of those herbicides that are applied that don't have any control of water hemp at all. Others are going to be wore out by now, but I guess I would just reiterate, don't think of fall applied herbicide control as controlling summer annuals. So its the whole goal is to control winter annuals, provide you with a relatively clean seed bed. It has done its job now. And now we're starting to see water hemp, giant ragweed starting to emerge. Those yeah, don't think that that's going to provide you any control of those. So now you have to Derek's point, you have to pull the trigger on whether you're pre or you're post, whatever you're applying. You have to pull that trigger ahead of time, even though the calendar might say it's too early. It's not too early based on growing degree units, and you want to be ahead of the game with water hemp instead of behind the game. So I think that's a really good point, guys, from both of you.
Well, Nick, I'll
Well,
add to that too. Yes, our falls, everybody, fall was definitely and typically in almost every year, fall's going to, application is going to be a good idea. But this year, scouting some of those fields that got a fall put on, they definitely did their job. Whether there's some weeds there or not, the pressure's less and easier to deal with. But the other thing I'll mention, add since we're talking weed control, that I was seeing over the last couple of days, driving through my territory, I was seeing some planters. Ideally, we'd like to get that burn down application and those winter annuals taken care of before the planters roll. I don't like planting into weeds in general, right? But in areas, I saw some planters that were planting in no-till right through some real heavy mats at henbit and pennycrests and some heavy mats of winter annuals. And I'll caution guys in those scenarios, if you went ahead and planted into a pretty dense pressure of winter annuals, I would give those weeds probably a few days before I went in there and tried to burn those down. Over my career, every spring, I look at some burn down scenarios where we just didn't get the burn down control we wanted. And typically that's because they end up spraying within a day or two of when the planters rolled through there. And when you damage weeds with the planter and run them all over and everything like that, those weeds are going to shut down or you're not going to get complete coverage because they're matted down. So I would give those. I mean, I don't want weeds getting any bigger than they have to, but if we go out there right after mechanical damage, especially with something that's not systemic, burn down contact product, you're probably going to have spotty control at best at heavy pressure. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, go ahead, Rodney.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and Derek hit on it. Even the fall burn downs worked, and so if you look at some farms that didn't get a fall burn down versus did, you can tell that you did the right thing in the fall because with all the warm we've had and the moisture, the weeds have come on like gangbusters. So, and also in my career too, to Derek's point, anytime you plant into standing weeds, you have to give it time to recover, and you have to make sure you might even up the application rate because you have to get coverage because you have, pardon the French, you've pissed them off, you've damaged them, you've did everything probably wrong, and I'm not scolding anybody, but now you have to make darn sure you get good coverage and everything so that you get a good kill.
Good point, Rodney. Um, I guess the other pest part of this whole equation, you alluded to it, Rodney, just insect pest pressure. I I would just say you start looking at moth counts or moth trapping that's been happening. I was looking at University of Missouri, and they've been catching true armyworm moths. They've been catching black cutworm moths, which I thought we might be a little bit ahead of normal on black cutworm, but it looks like we're about normal where we normally catch them at. But the true armyworm thing is pretty interesting. I mean, those numbers are relatively high, and then you start looking to the south of us, like in Kentucky, and they've got a pretty good site for looking up historical numbers. And those armyworm catches right now are way ahead of the 5 year average, and they're on pace to 2008, which was the large outbreak down there for true armyworms. So yeah, to your guys' point, the insect pressure is ramping up. And in some cases, we don't have the crop planted, but moths are coming in, they're laying eggs. And I guess my point is that, yeah, sometimes you can have a little bit of a situation if you have a small crop and you have a big larva, whether it comes to armyworms or it comes to black cutworms, et cetera. So just be mindful of that. You think, what do I do with an armyworm situation? There's not a lot of proactive things per se, but just monitor closely. They especially like grass crops, like corn, wheat, pasture. But they can impact soybeans too, especially if you got a cereal rye crop that's out there, and especially if you terminate that as beans are coming through, that can force them onto it. Just be mindful, monitor those closely because obviously they're called armyworms for a reason. They move in an army and they can destroy things pretty quick. Um, and then we've been talking about fall applied herbicides when it comes to black cutworms. Moths love to lay their eggs and all those winter annual weeds. So yeah, those fields with dense mats, a henbit or chickweed or whatever, those are magnets for fall or for black cutworms. And yeah, I'm not a big just blanket insecticide guy, but obviously I think you have to be mindful of the acres that are going to have a lot of pressure there when it comes to black cutworms. But just want to be sure that we're mindful of that.
And something I would throw out to you guys too down your way, since you've been warmer. I know it's early for corn rootworm, but they lay eggs down in the soil profile, and as the soil profile warms up, they come up. And so I could see you guys having earlier corn rootworm issues than normal because you've been warmer early and you've got an early crop. So it could potentially have an early crop. So just a FYI, I mean, I'm not sounding the alarm bell, but these are leading indicators that all pests could be higher levels than in past years because of the earlier temps and the conditions and a crop, susceptible crop being planted early.
Good points, Rodney. The only other point I just want to make on the warm March temperatures, and this is not necessarily something you can do about it now, but just I think about warmer temperatures. I think about conversion of basically nitrification. So conversion of that ammonium to nitrate, that losable form of nitrogen. It doesn't mean we've lost it by any means, but I start thinking about fall applied applications, those winter applications. I all in favor, nothing against those, but just making the point that we may have converted more ammonium to nitrate, which is a losable form. Doesn't mean we lost it. It's just something to be mindful of. If we get a lot of rain this spring, this summer, that we could lose a lot of nitrogen potentially. We have the other adage too, the other side though too, that we're potentially mineralizing more nitrogen, but just something to have a backup plan. I think is probably a pretty good idea for this year. Lastly, and this doesn't really tie into that pest conversation, but it kind of ties in that planning whole conversation. So, the reason why some folks maybe didn't plant, obviously the heavy rain that they were calling for is part of it. The other part for some folks was worried about a spring freeze event. And so something that came in later and having crops up, the damage that could potentially do. And I guess I'll just start off by saying average frost date or the last freeze date, Central Missouri, somewhere between April 10th and April 15th, if you look at the numbers. So we're getting real close to that. But I don't know if you guys want to kind of weigh in on that whole piece of it. What temperature are we going to cause damage? What do we have to worry about with emerged corn and soybeans if temperatures get low?
Yeah, I know that's probably one of the top concerns I get from the growers I work with is just worried about if I plant now, am I going to deal with the freeze? Because our freeze dates we're in that third week of April, right around the 20th or so for the northern part of my geography. So are we going to get another hard frost or hard freeze? I don't know, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me. But with something like corn, it's all about protecting that growing point. And on corn, our growing point stays below the ground until about V5. And so while corn, a freeze event might make it look a little bit ugly, there we might get some leaf burn and some tips and things like that that are looking a little necrotic or water soaked there after a freeze event. Typically, the impact on corn is going to be very minimal just because that growing point is still going to be protected until by the time it gets above the ground is exposed. We're certainly going to be beyond that freeze date. Now, on the soybean side of things, that's where we can get a little bit more concerned with, but it also depends on the stage with it as well. That the hook stage or the crook stage where you got that hypocotyle that's bent and still holding on to the cotyledons there. The hypocotyle is the area that stem right below the cotyledon. If that gets frozen off, it can be sensitive to a freeze event. If that gets frozen off, then they're toast at that point because there's no growing points below that type of deal. Now, around a lot of soybeans are going to tolerate some temperatures for a little while around that 32, even 30 degrees. That 28 degrees for an extended period of time is what most things are going to tell you where that critical threshold is. That 28 degrees point for a couple hours is when we really start to see damage. But once the soybeans get a little bit bigger, once we get, say, the unifoliate or even say something like V1, the first dry foliate, concern goes down maybe just a little bit, because even if we take out that apical meristem, which is the main growing point located at the top of the plant, there are the auxiliary buds that run other growing points, that if that terminal bud or apical meristem gets frozen off and shut down, they can start to produce and branch out of those auxiliary buds type deal, and it won't freeze event. It might look ugly, but won't result in complete death. But that cotyledon or crook stage, as sometimes called, if we get a hard freeze event, then that's where we're probably looking at complete death in a lot of cases, if it's for an extended period of time. But Rodney, I know you got a lot of good seed background. I don't know if you have something to add to that.
Well, on corn is pretty resilient. The other thing you got to remember, low-lying areas are going to be colder than your higher areas. Waterways, if you want a true tall tale sign, if it froze hard, just drive down your waterway or a low area and look. The other thing on soybeans is, we can frost some of those off and still be all right. It's just, are they how big of areas did it freeze? Corn, the other thing you want to remember, as corn gets bigger and gets towards that growing point, getting out of the ground, and we do have a freeze, we got to make sure that the whirl can unfurrow through that dead material if the corn's bigger. So I don't see us having a big freeze event, but don't go running out there the next day and say, everything's okay. You need to let it recover. The other thing, and I'll throw this out, and I hope we don't have to do it, but a shot of fungicide on a small corn crop that's been frosted off or whatever will help it recover also, when you're doing some post chemistry. So let's hope we don't even have to go down that road. But and then watch Mother's Day on the calendar. Something in Northwest Illinois always happens a Mother's Day weekend and temperatures. So watch that one too.
Well, Rodney, I want to reiterate what you said there, and we don't have time to go into a full topic on replant decisions, but you said it on especially soybeans. I don't like losing a lot of stand of soybeans, but I will say it does take a significant stand loss with soybeans to justify replant. So even if we do those low-lying areas, you get a little bit of freeze off on some soybeans, it's going to take a lot of soybeans to be frozen off before we're probably going to have to panic and rush out there and replant type thing.
Yeah, all good points, guys. I think you guys hit on all that well. Derek, just the growing point difference between corn and soybeans, and why you maybe are more concerned about beans depending on the size, to Rodney's point of the corn, if it's smaller corn. I will also just kind of make the comment, like I've seen in the past, probably the worst field I ever saw was an early planted soybean field on sand. I mean, sand can't insulate that temperature very well. And that was planted early, and it did take those out. They had to be replanted. But in most cases, it's usually sounds worse than what it is. And a lot of that's because, that ground's going to insulate it some, depending on the stage of the beans. To Derek's point, worst case would be if you got that heavy freeze as they're crooking out of the ground, and then those crooks all get hit by that temperature. But yeah, just keep in mind that there's going to be differences from field to field, and the ground typically insulates a little bit. And whether or not you have residue there on top of the ground, the elevation changes, all that. So generally, it's pretty hard to ever see a field that's just totally annihilated. But it can happen. But yeah, generally there's just microenvironments, to your guys' point, spots that maybe need to be fixed or not fixed. But anyways, just some things to be mindful of there. Guys, with that, I think we've probably used up enough time today. We've covered a lot of ground here from different topics, talking about the warm temperatures, what that means from a pest standpoint, planting standpoint, potentially nitrogen in the future, to the spring freeze events, what that could mean for corn and soybeans. So appreciate you guys joining me, and I thank everybody else for listening. We look forward to seeing you guys next time. Thank you for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by Into Novus Knowledge. Please reach out to your Into agronomist if we can help in any way. Join us next time for more in-depth agronomic advice.